We sort of made a design that can be inhabited as one single dwelling, or it can be configured in a multitude of different ways to divide it into two separate dwellings. So it could be divided vertically or horizontally as well, which I think opened it up a lot for different inhabitation. We actually, for our final presentation, created a timeline of the house. So going through the first occupants moving in and how it could change as they grew up and how they had children, and actually ended up with their parents moving in at the end of the day, because our house is made to be accessible. So the first story can be inhabited as an accessible dwelling, and the bathrooms could actually be altered into an accessible toilet at the end of the day. So things can change and alter based on the occupants' needs.
We tried to take a whole-of-life approach towards designing the cost-effectiveness of our particular submission. And I guess we want something that can be built for a reasonably affordable price in the beginning, so the initial capital expenditure. But then we also wanted to create something that could be lived in affordably and be cost-effective in that sense. Quite often, mortgage stress is tied in with the cost of household living. And so if you can reduce your household expenses, then you can also reduce other kind of financial stresses that occur in a typical family or household. So we've tried to design a house that's very energy efficient, that has high thermal performance, and we took a life cycle approach. So we looked at ways in which we could reduce the environmental and therefore the operational impact of the building across its entire life cycle, rather than just focusing on the upfront cost.
So we designed the facades to be quite open and quite inviting, and we don't really have a formal entrance as such. Depending on how you occupy the house, there could be different entrances at different places. It's very open, very inviting. We've also referenced a lot of Fremantle in the landscaping. We've used a Fremantle landscaper actually was informing our design. We use local materials, native species. We've also tried to improve the microclimate of the site through having a lot of open space and a lot of greenery.
Fremantle's got a very unique sense of community, we believe. Alex lives in Beaconsfield and works in Fremantle, and I'm a frequent visitor to the area. And I think with that sense of community, one of the things the competition brief asked for was to design a response to the One Planet Living principles. And we think that ties in very much so with the core values of Fremantle residents. And the other thing too, being a corner site, quite often the challenge is that you have two faces of the building that have to present to the street. And our residential design guidelines usually say that one can be the dominant elevation, the other one can be minor, which basically means it can be hidden behind a fence. We don't think that creates a very good relationship to the streetscape, so we tried to come up with a design that actually addresses both street frontages, not just one.
Well, we named it the Gap House because it's designed to fill the gap between your parents' house and your own house. We did some demographic research, and we found a window of opportunity around the age of 30 when Gen Ys are motivated to move out permanently, but they might still need some help. So the Gap House is like a share house that you buy with your friends and eventually move on to buy your own house.
The design is very flexible. The different building components can be rotated on the site to suit different sites and orientations. And as well as that, each of the bedroom modules can be added or removed to suit different site sizes. Each bedroom has their own private entrance and private courtyard, and the living space can be divided up into 3 different living spaces separately so that people can have their own private space, even though there might be multiple people living in the same house.
The suites are designed to accommodate any combination of 3 couples, 3 singles, so there is an inherent flexibility there. If you did want to change that configuration later on, if you wanted to grow into a small family or something, then you know, there's nothing to stop you going in and reconfiguring the layout slightly and easily. As for intergenerational living and that kind of thing as well.
And we also thought our house doesn't have any internal circulation, which we did primarily for cost effectiveness, but also so that the 3 couples could go to their bedrooms independently without having to go through the house proper. So that's also something that you could do to change the design to enclose the circulation if it was to be suited for like a family kind of situation. The plan is very simple. We've deliberately come up with a very rational, simple building footprint. We've stacked the wet areas between the upper and lower floor so that servicing the building is very cost effective, and our load bearing walls are also aligned between the upper and lower floor so that our structural solution is very rational and we can reduce our structural spans. The materials are also cost effective. We've used Hebel blocks predominantly as the masonry element to the building, which are fast to erect and also allow us to provide all the building makeup in one material, which is again saves time on site.
What we've created is a house that has a series of private and public outdoor and indoor spaces and along the street fronts, and they've actively engages the street with the passerbys, with neighbours, creating some social interaction. And the White Gum Valley vernacular has been complementary to the materials that we've used in the house, such as the timber cladding and the masonry. So I think the house, if it is chosen and built, it's going to sit quite comfortably and quite confidently in this new development.
I've been really interested in using water tanks as thermal mass, and I've located that in the centre of the building. And the idea is that thermal mass has ability to stabilise the temperature inside, so the building ventilates at night time, cools that mass, and then cools the interior of the building. I really believe that people get great benefit when they have connections between the interior and the exterior. And I've noticed that as our lot sizes shrink, we're cutting out our backyard, and it's got to the point where we really can't have an effective backyard in these lot sizes, especially at 250 square metres. Yet at the front of the property we're still restrained by front setbacks and verges. So to create a really good outdoor environment in a tight space, I believe that we should really be sticking the building as far back on the lot as possible and then using that front verge space as outdoor space. The major initiative, I suppose, is the ability to subdivide the building, and that's facilitated by the changes in the R codes of last August, and that allowed small ancillary dwellings to be rented out to people other than family members. So this allows the building to be occupied as a whole building, occupied as a 1-bedroom apartment and a 2-bedroom apartment, and then with a divider between the two, and then it can be opened up again. So there's total flexibility in that. So I suppose any type of occupation it accommodates for. One thing that I've been dealing with lately in private practice is prefabrication. And what I've learnt with that is it's actually very hard to beat conventional construction for cost, for value on the ground. But when you get up above the ground, there starts to be some real benefits. So the project pursues sort of partial prefabrication. One of the things that I've tried to do with a house is to replicate or reinterpret the traditional Australian home. So I've used the masonry brick walls at the bottom level and then tried to pick up on that big, long, corrugated roof that you find on sort of Federation type houses in the area. So that form is common to the area. And then the other thing I've done is, because I've moved the house right to the back, we've got this big front garden that now allows people to interact with their neighbours. But by and large, all the activity in that house should occur out on the street, and we think that in an urban environment, it's really where it should be, I suppose.
The project is called the Step House. And it's aptly named that as a way to deal with affordability, which we see as the main issue with the housing project. Well, the project takes on 2 modes of operation. One is the augmentation process, and the second is alteration. Now, augmentation is where the buyer has the ability to transform the interior from what is originally starting out as a raw but livable shell. So paint finishes to walls, ceilings, skirtings, cornices can all be added to in the future when time and money permit. Well, White Gum Valley and Fremantle, in a more broader context, have a history of utilitarian buildings, and this became somewhat of the foundation for the project in terms of the material selection. It's skinned in a metal corrugated iron. Low fences and a kind of community-based street frontage is also another consideration that is widely seen in White Gum Valley. This part of the project was tackled through the idea of keeping things simple, using standard construction techniques rather than trying to explore extraordinary technologies. So it's a simple timber-framed construction clad in a simple corrugated iron material, and it then becomes a series of spatial arrangements that enable the delightfulness of the space and the volumes created outside.
The limited range of affordable housing options that are available to a lot of young West Australians acted as the driver and key starting point for the project. The scheme sought to find a more spatially efficient medium density dwelling that would really maximise the potentials of Lot 7 at the development. The original framework was conceived as a series of prefabricated habitable modules that were lifted and wrapped in a uniform cladding system. Flexibility was the key design parameter for the project, from financial structuring to the spatial organisation. As is illustrated in the case study that I presented, the build-it-down model is able to accommodate tenants from a really wide spectrum of social, economic and cultural demographics. The challenge lies in ensuring that the spatial contrast is balanced between areas of social interaction and entertainment with those of privacy and intimacy. Well, we anticipate that the key structural and internal components could be prefabricated. The residence on Lot 7 would be broken down to, say, 5 individual elements with a maximum width that would ensure transport to site is possible. Construction materials and finishes have been selected according to their embodied energy values, whilst the internal and external heights have been decided upon based on multiples of available standard panel dimensions. The material palette and formal language draw on the infrastructure of Greater Fremantle and the port, while the unique organisation frames the entry to the development, aligning with the aspirations and visions of the Greater Master Plan.
I think our idea initiated from, I guess, a desire to capture ideas of suburban nostalgia and I guess a desire to push people onto the street and flip those typical typologies of housing that we have at the moment, where the backyard is kind of the primary focus and the kitchen's pushed out into the yard. We wanted to kind of invert that, and it started with the notion of the back shed, and the back shed became the entry portico. So I guess the 5 components were the back shed, the kitchen window, the stair, the lemon tree, which I think the lemon tree, we ended up calling it the lemon tree house because I think it was really important to the overall idea. It encumbered a lot of the things that we were talking about.
Housing for Gen Y is not just isolated to White Gum Valley itself or the Perth suburban context. So we started to look at, obviously LandCorp is a WA-based company, so we looked at that across the whole broad spectrum. And that our 5 components, which Sally's previously spoke about, can fit within 28 square metres. So that central core we can actually cloak in relation to site-specific contexts, whether that be Broome, Albany, and it's that core and those ideals and those components that we develop remains the same, but that can be adapted across the state to varying site conditions. The app ideas stem from the fact that in analysing Gen Y, obviously the stereotypical point of view is technology-based, Facebook, Twitter, all these sorts of things. Social media. And I guess after thinking about it a lot, we thought that, smart wiring in a home is an effective way to use your house better, but how do you make that applicable to a Gen Y context? So we're not just talking about apps where you lie on the couch and you switch your aircon to 22 degrees or automate curtains and things like that. So the idea stemmed from the fact that perhaps we can use technology in a way to re-engage the user rather than technology to engage the house. So the house then informs this app about telling the user through simple notifications and prompts how they can better use the house. So that actually gets you up off the couch, engaged, and contributing to the passive solar design and how you might alter things to make the house cooler.
I guess it feeds off that whole idea of community and neighbourhood and living closer together as well.
I guess the whole point is that it's not all about the app, but this thing exists to make living sustainably in the community and for yourself in a much better way. So Gen Y can easily access it and feel like they're doing better things for themselves in the community, but they're not like putting my hand up and saying, look, I'm an eco, green, sustainable guy.
And it's not about creating a new technology. These are things that already exist.
Yeah.
We're just kind of harnessing them to make living in a house easier or better.
And using them to get active instead of inactive.
And educating people.
Exactly, yeah.
Sorry.